Good morning. Good morning. As our guests are joining, just want to welcome you again to Downtown Download. We will begin in about 1 minute. We're so excited about today's show. Thank you. As the numbers continue to rise, I want to make sure we get everybody in. And just a reminder that this will be recorded. So if you do miss any parts of it, please go to our website at godowntownbaltimore.com. So we will get started. I don't want to waste one more minute. Good morning to everyone. Welcome to Downtown Download. I am Downtown Partnerships President, Shalonda Stokes, and joined as always by my cohort, my partner in crime, Councilman Eric Costello. And we know that President Biden will take office, the oath of office tomorrow morning. And as our city and country are at an inflection point, I'm sure nobody needs me to spell out all of those things that we faced. We are honored to have Senator Van Hollen with us this morning. And so we'll get to him in a minute. As an engineer by training, I just want you all to know, I believe the way to any problem, solving any problem, starts with getting the best information. You really can't fix what you don't understand. So with all of that in mind this month, we're featuring prominent leaders so that you can get firsthand information about how our government is working on our behalf. We want to make sure that you, our audience, have the opportunity to hear firsthand and to ask questions. You know, last week we had the newly elected City Council President, Nick Mosby, and next week we'll talk with Mayor Brandon Scott. But today, on the eve of the presidential inauguration, so thank you for still joining us. We're honored to be joined by our U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen. Before we get to you, I have a few updates that I'd like to give just on what's happening this week. As many of you may have heard, instead of Baltimore Restaurant Week, this year, Downtown Partnership has replaced it with a new effort that we're calling Rally Around the Restaurants. So together with our restaurant partner, Visit Baltimore, we've been making it as easy as possible for food businesses to tell their stories, to share their menus, to grow their businesses, and increase their social media followings. So we've teamed up with the Baltimore Restaurant Relief Fund, and that's a nonprofit that's helping food businesses and their employees during this hard time. And so we encourage everybody to go to baltimorerestaurantweek.com to support these restaurants. Councilman, I encourage everyone out there to support our food businesses frequently and directly. I know I saw you and the mayor and a lot of the council members posting pictures of each restaurant in your district. I thank you for that. It's continuing, it's spreading. I know that we can all do the same. So I know people will get tired of hearing me say it almost like a broken record, but whether it's restaurants, retail stores, performing arts venues, or attractions, if we're not here for them this winter, they may not be around for us next spring. So in other Downtown Partnership news, we're off to a very strong 2021. Our teams are using new digital tools to make it better for business checks, to track service requests for things like cleaning, outreach, and infrastructure repairs. I'm excited to announce that we've also filled 2 new executive positions that will improve our services to our members and our stakeholders in the Downtown Management Authority District. The first is Tom Akers. He's our new Chief of Operations Management. He brings a long history of organizational reengineering, public service, and he'll really help lead our data-based approach for our operations team's effectiveness. You may have known him from the Liquor Board, but he is here with us now, and we're excited to have him. Our other leadership team member is our longtime VP of Marketing, Ms. Lauren Hamilton, and she'll take over the other position as our Chief Marketing Officer. So in addition to marketing, membership, and events, her portfolio includes strategic planning, economic development, and all the things that we know will help stimulate new business investment and jobs in downtown neighborhoods. So with Tom and Lauren at the helm and an amazing team, I can already feel a higher level of excitement, and I hope that you will see the same and believe the same. Please stand by for that. So Councilman, those are the updates that I had. Do you have anything before we get to the senator?
Thanks, Shalonda. A couple quick updates. One, curbside recycling service did resume today. So you should be seeing that at your homes, whatever your regular day for recycling collection is this week. Number 2, the governor on Thursday moved phase 1B up to yesterday. for COVID vaccinations. I'm going to plug in a link in the chat window. This has everything that you need to know on the vaccination if you are in Baltimore City. We certainly ask for your patience as all of the appointments through the end of January are already booked. And lastly, we will have our first City Council committee hearing of the year. It's going to be today. We will be hearing the third-party delivery app cap bill, which will put a cap on the fees that third-party delivery apps such as Grubhub, DoorDash, et cetera, are charging our local restaurants. I introduced that bill in partnership with Council President Mosby. So we're looking forward to that hearing at 10 a.m. And with that, back to you, Shalonda.
Is that why we're dressed up today, or is it because of Senator Van Hollen? Because I know this is a new look. I have to call out the look with the tie.
No comment for now.
No comment. So it is my pleasure to introduce U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen. Senator Van Hollen, welcome back. You have been a tireless public servant, the first in the Maryland legislature since 2002, first in the Maryland legislature since 2002 as a member of Congress. A Democrat, the senator prides himself in working across the aisles on issues like increasing medical research and protecting the Chesapeake Bay. When he was on our show last spring, he was fighting for federal stimulus payments, thank you, for businesses and individuals, something we'll talk more about today. And he is just as dedicated to equal rights, equal justice, as he is equal opportunity. With everything happening in Washington right now, this is an incredibly busy time for you, we know, Senator, which is why we couldn't be more pleased that you took a moment to be with all of us today. So I thank you and welcome you to the show this morning.
Well, Shalonda, thank you for the warm welcome. Most of all, thank you for your leadership as president of the Downtown Partnership, and to your entire team and everybody who has worked so hard to keep the city and our communities together during this very difficult time of the pandemic and the economic harm that so many are experiencing. And it's also great to be here with your partner on this show, Councilman Eric Costello, and I look forward to working with him in the conversation. I'll just make a very few comments up front because I look forward to the questions. As you said at the outset, we're all looking forward to the inauguration tomorrow of the new president, Joe Biden, new vice president, Kamala Harris. And we're looking forward to getting right to work with them. Many of the things they can do on their own authority. And President Biden has already laid out some of the measures he's going to take through executive action in terms of increasing the deployment of the vaccine. The target is to vaccinate 100 million Americans in 100 days. And as we do that, also to continue following the guidelines of the CDC. We've got to defeat this pandemic in order to fully get back into gear. I was pleased that the Congress, on a bipartisan basis in December, passed the $900 billion economic rescue plan. It was a little late in coming, but it provides some bridge assistance until we get into the early months of this new administration. We can talk about it. There was lots of assistance there for small businesses and a real focus to get money targeted to those small businesses most in need. Also for venues and stages and museums and others that are struggling, many in the downtown area. And then, of course, the incoming president has announced his $1.9 billion American Rescue Plan, and happy to talk about the details of that as well. We'll have a new majority in the United States Senate, very slim majority, and I hope that will help us in getting the votes to pass some of these important measures. So with that, let me just say I'm really pleased to be back with you. I look forward to the time when we can all do this in person, but let's keep plugging away and get the job done.
Thank you so much, Councilman. I know you'll ask a ton of questions. I want to just remind all of our audience, if you would please place your questions in the Q&A box. After Councilman Costello finishes his, we'll get to the audience questions. So thank you. Councilman, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Shalonda. Senator, thanks again for being with us once again. It's always a pleasure to have you on Downtown Download. A lot's happened in our nation since you were last on the webinar back in May. Before we get to recent events, I'd like to get your take on the federal response to COVID-19 in terms of both public health and economic recovery. So speaking broadly, because we're going to drill down into all this in a moment, what went well this past year? What do you wish that we could have done differently?
Well, you're right. That is a big question. Let me just hit the highlights. When it comes to the federal government response to the pandemic and the health front, I think, unfortunately, this administration, the Trump administration, was really slow and negligent in its response in so many ways. At the beginning, of course, they were very late in acknowledging the size of the challenge, and that continued right through. And so we did not have enough of a federal mobilization to get out personal protective equipment, PPE, to make sure that we coordinated things at the state level. And on the good news front, on the healthcare piece, we were able to mobilize the American scientific community to develop the vaccines, one of which, the Moderna vaccine, Marylanders were very involved in various ways. On the economic front, I do think that the CARES Act, which we passed back in March, was one of the highlights of congressional action on a bipartisan basis. Again, it wasn't perfect, but it provided an essential lifeline to the country. Then we had a period of time when we should have done more, but did not have a bipartisan agreement. But of course, in December, we were able to come together and get the $900 billion bill. So I think in terms of the economic response at the federal level, in terms of Congress, again, some missteps, but overall, in the end, we're able to come up with plans. And now we're, as I said, we're bridging it to the next administration where they can, take over and hopefully have another big push.
Thanks, Senator. This past week, the country averaged over 240,000 new COVID cases a day, which is up almost 30% since the start of the new year. Also this past week, you joined with our other U.S. Senator, Ben Cardin, and the rest of the Maryland congressional delegation to announce more than $400 million in funding for the state to expand COVID-19 vaccine distribution, contact tracing, and testing capacity. What will that funding mean for Marylanders, and how are we doing relative to other states in terms of our vaccine distribution?
Well, these funds should help the state and the city and counties throughout Maryland with more resources to deploy the vaccine. And you're right, this has been a team effort with the Maryland delegation, Senator Cardin, of course, Kwasi Mfume, Troopersberger, Sarbanes. I mean, this has been a team effort at the federal level. The challenge, of course, is to make sure that these vaccines get into people's arms. And I think it's been clear that Maryland got off to a very slow start at the state level in terms of getting the vaccine out. For a while, we were unfortunately dead last. We're now ranked about 35th out of the 50 states in terms of the vaccines given per population. We need to do better, and I hope these federal funds will help expedite the process. We've got to remove a lot of the bottlenecks, what's called the last mile here. We know what the last mile means when it comes to internet service. The same is true with the vaccine. Having the vaccine sitting in some building somewhere doesn't do us any good. We've got to get it out into the neighborhoods, and that is a big focus of the Biden administration, trying to make sure that larger public places, churches, rec centers, places like that become vaccine distribution centers.
Thanks. And we know that's something that Mayor Scott and the health department are very focused on, just when you look at Baltimore's geography and population and how best to distribute the vaccine. And just building off your response to that last question, thinking about PPE acquisition to testing to vaccine distribution on the whole gambit, the federal government has allowed states thus far to essentially chart our own course. I know you see that changing under President Biden. What is the American Rescue Plan? And can we expect a national policy to create, essentially one playbook for how states deal with COVID-19?
Yes, we can. The American Rescue Plan that's been laid out by incoming President Biden has a much more robust federal role. Under this plan, the federal role is not simply as like a distribution center to the states. They will provide much more, federal involvement and more active federal oversight. Starting with the fact that the incoming president is going to establish sort of federal standards for wearing masks in federal buildings and other places where the federal government has jurisdiction. That has been the guidance of CDC. We tried to implement this earlier to save lives. Unfortunately, the outgoing Trump administration ignored a lot of the advice of the public health experts. But the new administration is going to have a much more robust approach, both towards distributing PPE and to the distribution of the vaccine, as we were just talking about. So that is all part of the American Rescue Plan. Some of it will require the funds requested by the Biden administration in that plan, which means that we're going to have to get that through the United States Congress. And we want to get that done as soon as possible.
Senator, can you give us a little bit of a breakdown of how the 1.9 trillion pans out, just in terms of the major categories of spending in that American Rescue Plan?
Yes. So it includes a number of major components. One are the additional individual payments. The bill we passed in December, the $900 billion bill, provides those $600 individual payments based on income eligibility. The Biden plan will include another $1,400, bringing the total individual payments to $2,000 per person. It also has significant funds for our schools and to reopen schools, because I think all of us recognize that that's a priority. We want to do it safely, but we want to make sure that our kids are able to get back into the classrooms. That's an imperative. As we also work, and I know you've worked on this, I've worked on this, on really expanding access to high-speed internet and broadband so that it's truly universal. There are also very significant funds in here for the whole plan to deploy the vaccine, to deploy more of a sort of a federal health service response. I've proposed expanding FEMA, for example, but the plan includes resources for PPE distribution and an infrastructure, a public health infrastructure to deploy the vaccine. I should say that the new president on week one is also going to extend the deferment on student loan payments and will be extending the eviction moratorium. As part of the eviction moratorium, it's really important that we provide funds so people can make their rental payments, so we don't have a tsunami of evictions at the end. And of course, the people that the rental payments are owed to have to pay their bills as well. So that's going to be part of this effort.
Thank you. So turning over to the economy, we've lost about 22 million jobs nationally due to COVID this past spring. We had a rebound over the summer, but the latest Department of Labor data shows unemployment rising pretty sharply. Nationally, we lost 140,000 additional jobs in December, the first net decline since the spring. What's the Senate's plans to address long-term unemployment moving forward, as well as the incoming administration?
Sure. Well, you're right. This is a huge issue. So, in terms of the large number of people who lost their jobs because of the pandemic, we need to do two things. Number one, we need to make sure that they have a lifeline until they can get their job back. And that's the extension of the unemployment insurance with another $300 per week. We need to make sure that small businesses can continue to weather the storm. And a big part of the plan we passed in December includes, the Paycheck Protection Program, much better targeted plan for other venues that have been hard hit. But I am very worried that as the economy comes back, as we defeat the coronavirus, that we're going to have a chronic problem of people who are long-term unemployed. This was a big problem even before the pandemic. There were about 1 million Americans who were looking for work for a long time and couldn't find it, including thousands in Maryland and in Baltimore. And what we know is that the longer somebody is unemployed, the harder it is for that person to get a job. And when they eventually get a job, they often have to take one at lower income levels. Right now, we have 4 million Americans unemployed, long-term unemployed, someone looking for work for more than 6 months. In October, we saw the largest spike in long-term unemployment in our country's history. So I have put together a plan. We are working with the incoming Biden administration, working with some of my fellow senators to deal with this. And that involves providing some subsidized employment for businesses, small businesses or nonprofits, or even some of the public sector, to help pay for the jobs of people who are chronically looking for work and out of work but looking. And that also comes with some assistance for job training and wraparound services. And the idea is to do this on a temporary basis, 1 year, 2 years, get somebody into the workforce on their feet, and then they can proceed in the workforce without this additional job subsidy. But if we don't do something like this, there are going to be millions of Americans and thousands of Marylanders who are just continually out of work. And my view is everybody that wants to work, that's trying to find a job, we should provide them that opportunity to help themselves and their family. And so that's what this legislation is all about.
Senator, as Shalonda knows, I go off script every episode for at least one question. So here it is. Yesterday, U.S. Senator Kamala Harris resigned from the Senate. She's going to be our new vice president tomorrow. Alex Padilla, the Secretary of State in California, was appointed by the governor to take her seat. Everything that I've read about Mr. Padilla is incredibly impressive. Wanted to get your thoughts on your new Democratic colleague from the state of California.
Right, and I've been in touch with him, and I'm looking forward to working with him. He has a great reputation coming out of California as somebody who's serious, focused on solving problems, and we got a lot of problems to tackle right now. So I think he's going to be a good partner in the United States Senate. I can assure you we'll work with him on keeping him up, getting him up to speed on Maryland's priorities, as I'm sure he will on us on California's priorities. But I think he's going to be a great addition to our team. In addition to the economic challenges, we also have to urgently face the issues of racial equality and social justice issues. And I know he'll be an important partner on that as well. Lots of bills that passed the House of Representatives over the last 2 years that have been sitting in the United States Senate without even getting a vote because Mitch McConnell blocked them. I'm thinking of things like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, things like the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. So there are lots of measures that have already passed the House. I expect they will pass the House again in relatively short order, where we need Senator Padilla and others to get us over the finish line.
Thank you. So here comes the action-packed question, Senator. So this is going to be a multi-part question. There's a lot to unpack here. So here we are. It's the eve of President Biden's inauguration. Our nation clearly stands divided. There was an insurrection to stop the peaceful transfer of power stoked by the current president's rhetoric. As a result, he was impeached for a second time. The trial is now headed to the Senate. What happens next? Is there precedent for an impeachment conviction after someone has left office? When does the new majority take the chair? And will there be any compromise to allow non-impeachment business to happen, such as hearings to confirm President-elect Biden's cabinet?
Well, that is a big question. Let me try to dive into it and take the pieces. First of all, the hearings on President Biden's nominees, or on some of the critical ones, begin today. So there'll be hearings on national security cabinet officials, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, Secretary of Homeland Security, Director of National Intelligence, and on the economic front, Secretary of Treasury. So we're trying to tee those up right away. We have not yet received the articles of impeachment from the House of Representatives. When we do, that's when the clock starts ticking to have a trial. And we'll try to get as much done before we receive the articles. Once we receive them, we're working to double track this process so we could spend the afternoons on the trial and the mornings on clearing some of these nominees. I do think, Council member, that it is important that we have a trial. There is precedent for conducting an impeachment trial after somebody has already left office, a federal official. We don't have it in terms of a president. Of course, we didn't have a president who'd been, impeached twice, and we haven't had a president who essentially incited a violent mob to insurrection to storm the Capitol for the express purpose of disrupting and interfering with the electoral vote count. Some people forget that this was January 6th was not a random day. That was the day the Senate and House gathered to vote and certify the results of the election. So this was a calculated effort to interfere with the democratic process, small d. So we will have that trial once we receive the articles of impeachment, but we're also determined to double track this process so that we can get about the business of clearing and voting on nominees and taking up that American Rescue package that the president has forwarded. That's likely to begin in the House of Representatives, where they will send it to committee and debate it. So we'll have a little time before it gets to the United States Senate for a vote. I don't know if I covered all the pieces there, but that's where we are. I don't think any of us in our worst nightmares ever expected to see this kind of attack on the United States Capitol, let alone an attack that was instigated by the President of the United States for the purpose of disrupting the count in the presidential election. So I do think it's important that as a country, regardless of party, we take a moment and make it absolutely clear that this is unacceptable in the United States of America. This is unconstitutional action that was taken. And that is why the House moved forward with the second impeachment of this president, and why there will be, I don't know the exact timing, a second trial. We witnessed people parading the Confederate flag through the United States Capitol. We witnessed people taking down the American flag and putting in its place a Trump flag. And again, doesn't matter to me what party anyone belongs to, Republicans, Democrats, something else. That is not the way democracy works in the United States. We don't pledge allegiance to one person. We pledge allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. And that's why this is an important moment, both for accountability and also important moment as we work to, launch the new administration on an successful route, not for them, but for the country.
Senator, you covered everything. You did great. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to get my 6-part question out of the way before our hearing at 10 o'clock today. I appreciate it. There's been a lot of talk about the role that social media and big tech have played in our last 2 presidential elections. Is there anything more that Congress can do to address online misinformation, specifically Section 230? And does the situation leading up to the insurrection give the federal government standing to limit certain speech on social platforms in the nation's public interest?
Well, this is a big question, is how Americans receive their information today, what kind of information. And what we've seen over the last 20 years is sort of the segmentation of information in America. I'll get to social media in a minute, but just think of cable TV, where now people just tune in to the stations that seem to reinforce, their preconceived notions. And in many cases, there's no adherence to facts on some of those cable shows. And the same is true in social media, where, again, there's the whole world of information is available to people, but through both self-selection and algorithms and reinforcement, people again see information or that sort of feeds their pre-existing notions. Now, what do we do about it? You've got major, social media companies, Twitter, Facebook. They have tried to police some of this information. For example, Proud Boys was thrown off of Facebook more than 3 years ago. QAnon was disqualified earlier in the summer. Maybe, should have been done earlier. And of course, recently, Twitter and Facebook have disqualified the President of the United States because of comments he made which potentially precipitated violence. And here's the issue, as you know. The United States government should not be dictating speech content. After all, the First Amendment gives every American the right to free speech, and we have to be very careful that the government not infringe on that. However, when free speech crosses the line into the promotion of violence, that is where the federal government can sort of work to encourage these social media companies to employ standards. They are, of course, private companies, so they are not limited by the First Amendment, and they have tried to establish standards that govern, decisions as to who can be on their platforms, what statements are allowable on their platforms. But clearly, this is a moment where, as a country, we've got to really take a close look at this. I mean, with social media companies, there are other issues, of course, in addition to, the content online that could foment violence. There are issues of privacy. There are issues of there are a whole host of other issues where I think the national government should at least develop some standards. One of the things you're seeing, Eric, as you know, is that as sort of the larger platforms, Facebook and Twitter, disqualify people because of incendiary comments that could provoke violence, they just go to other platforms that don't have those standards, right? Like Parler. And then when Parler was essentially, shut down because Amazon and others cut off their services, then they go underground to other areas like Telegraph, which is end-to-end encrypted. So I guess the point is we've really got to look at this as a whole. And at this, as we work to prevent people using these platforms to incite violence, again, we also have to protect people's rights under the First Amendment. And that's going to be the challenge ahead.
Senator, it seems like, at least from my perspective, you've come up with a very thoughtful and balanced approach to what's a really complicated question. And there's really no easy answer to it. I'm going to jump over to Shalonda in a second. I know we've got a number of great questions coming in from our audience. Real quick, one last thing, and I know we've touched on this this morning already during this discussion, but our country has been stressed and depressed as a result of COVID. 2020 was by far one of the most difficult years in recent memory. Give us 3 quick things that you're looking forward to that make you optimistic about 2021 for our state and for our city.
Well, 2021, we've been off to a very rough start, especially with this attack on the Capitol. But I do believe that by working together, the city, the state, the country, we will rise above the divisions, defeat, the most divisive voices. And I know that the incoming president, President Biden, is going to work very hard, and already is working hard to unite the country. So I am looking forward, really counting the new year starting tomorrow on Inauguration Day, where I really hope our country, regardless of party, will be able to come together to tackle these issues. And, our country's, based on the idea that we can have vigorous disagreements. We can fight on policy issues, but do it in a nonviolent way. And when it crosses over into unconstitutional means and violence, that is, where we have to draw the line. And I know the new president and vice president are going to work hard to do that. Number 2, the vaccine was developed and it is being distributed. And now I think we have an administration that's going to be serious about deploying it more quickly. And so I'm optimistic that we're going to defeat this virus. And third, I'm optimistic that we will begin to address the economic pain caused by this as our economy recovers and the small businesses and so many members of the downtown partnership can get back up and running and back in gear. And then I'm optimistic that we will tackle some of the huge and urgent questions we face as a country when it comes to social justice and racial equality. So I am optimistic about 2021. I think, our country's, best days are still ahead. And I'm looking forward to working with you and your fellow council members. And I want to thank you, Eric, for all your leadership on these important issues. Hope you get the votes on the bill you've got coming up. And it's been a real honor to partner with you and your colleagues on the city council and working with the new mayor, Mayor Scott. And look, we have a lot of work to do. But Baltimore City is a great American city, and its best days are still ahead. And I am optimistic. Let's just beat this thing, turn the page, and get moving.
Yes, sir. And Senator, the honor is all ours to be able to work with you and have you represent us. Appreciate your time. Shalonda, back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you both for your service. I am equally optimistic, and it's because of great partnerships that we have. I think what you've laid out, Senator, is right on point. And we know that you have one of our very own team members. I'm gonna do a high five, big up for our former Councilwoman Shannon Sneed, who's a part of your team already. So we know that we have a voice for the city in your office. We actually have a question in that right from Joy Giordano, who's asking if you could outline the role of former Councilwoman Shannon Sneed that she'll play in your office with relation to Baltimore City.
Right. Well, Shalonda, you you took my closing here, but it's all right. I was gonna, as I thanked you and everybody else and wrapped up, I wanted to say we are just thrilled to have the former council member Shannon Sneed as part of our team. She'll be heading up, all our Baltimore City operations, and she's going to be a key sort of liaison and partner between me and everybody on this call, and of course to the city council and to the mayor, as we work together to identify ways that the federal government can help support the city, whether it's on the economic front and the job front. I mentioned the issue of long-term unemployment, whether it's making sure we all together tackle the very important public safety issues that are so important to to success of the city. And there are a number of proposals that I put forward at the national level that we're going to be working with the city on. And Shannon's going to be obviously our key sort of ambassador to the city.
Exciting. We are excited and happy for her and your team's success. So thank you on that. This next question, I'm going to shift back to COVID, coming from Marcia Collins. And she's, after giving you some kudos there, asking the recent announcement that more COVID vaccine would be sent out that was supposed to be part of the second inoculation was later found that those vaccines were not available. Have you been able to learn how additional and sufficient supplies will be made available and distributed?
Well, you're right. This was, I think, a shock to everybody because the Trump administration had said that its strategy was to withhold the second doses in reserve. And then when the Biden team said that their strategy was to just quickly deploy all the vaccine because they were confident that Pfizer and Moderna and others would produce more in this interim period so that people could get their second doses, and that the priority was to get the first of vaccinations from many as people as possible. And then, of course, we discovered that, there was no, second supply. Now, what we're trying to get to the bottom of right now, at this moment, is Pfizer says that it has, a supply for the second round. I think the bottom line is that the incoming president, the incoming Biden administration, is going to use all the powers available to us and the resources, money needed, to keep the vaccine supply growing and distributed. And that I think we've seen the goal more and more is just to, we do have the sort of the steps of different groups, but what we don't want is bottlenecks, where there's vaccines sitting in some location and, not enough people from the particular group are getting it, and then it risks going bad. So yes, we need to make sure the priority groups are getting it, but we also need to make sure that we don't have vaccine sitting in certain places. And we need to make sure that this is distributed on an equitable basis and gets into neighborhoods where it's most needed. We know communities of color. We know the Black community has been especially hard hit. We need to make sure this vaccine is available, through churches and the other kind of more public venues that I talked about, not, sitting in some clinician's office that nobody is getting easy access to. So we look forward to working with the city and the state. And that is part of the, Biden administration's plan is to have more of a federal strategy and not allow state and local bottlenecks to prevent the distribution.
No, thank you for that. I'm going to stay in the area of equity since you mentioned that with the question from Alex Adams with Elevate Baltimore. As you know, particularly in Baltimore, Black organizations have been at the front line supporting communities and families using a race equity framework, but tend to be the last to access recovery packages. Can you talk about any intentional efforts to stabilize Black-led nonprofit organizations or grassroots organizations?
Yes, and one of the things about the Paycheck Protection Program was that in its early days, it had a lot of problems in terms of, getting the funds both to, community lenders and getting the funds to small businesses that needed help the most, especially minority-owned businesses. Over a period of time, that program has been much improved and better targeted. And in this latest round, it really is focused on the smallest businesses. And very importantly, large sums of the monies are set aside to flow through CDFIs, so community-based lenders, and minority depository institutions. So, Black-owned banks in Baltimore City, of course, Harbor Bank is one of those big major banks. And so there is much more intentionality in this latest version of really getting funds where they're most needed. And again, Shannon and others in my Baltimore office look forward to working with people on this call and others to make sure that that happens. We spent a lot of time trying to link qualified businesses up with and small businesses up with the help. In terms of vaccine distribution and PPE distribution, same thing. And one of the priorities that we've been really pushing hard on is to make sure both PPE and vaccines get to the communities that have been hardest hit. And that is also a focus of the incoming Biden administration.
Which is great to hear. Thank you so much. This next question is from Rachel Donegan, I believe with Promise Heights. And her question mentions that she recognizes that you recently put forth an expanded federal full service community school program. And she's asking if you could tell us a bit about why you think programs like community schools and Promise Neighborhoods should be funded both at the federal and local level.
Right. This is a critical issue. I'm a big believer in Promise Neighborhoods and the community school model. I've introduced legislation with Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio to significantly boost this. I do know that part of the package from the Biden administration has more resources for our public schools. We want to work with them to make sure that they're also focused on the community schools model, and we're advancing that concept, because the idea of community schools, of course, is we want the teacher in the classroom to be able to focus on teaching our students, but we also recognize that students come to school with a whole range of other issues that are impacting their lives. Hunger, a family in many cases that doesn't have a job. And of course, right now, there's the whole issue of making sure people are connected to the internet. So the community schools model, the idea is that, children don't, they come from, a context where there are all sorts of issues impacting their lives. And we need to make sure that we're addressing all of the needs of our kids. And that also helps the teacher who's in the classroom for instruction be able to focus on getting the lessons across rather than being the person responsible for addressing other important needs in a child's life. So we are going to continue to push this model. Thank you for all the work with Promise Neighborhoods, community schools. I do believe it's essential. I should say that when it comes to Maryland, it's going to be very important that the full legislature override the governor's veto of the Kerwin Schools Commission, because that is a lot of important and targeted resources for our schools.
Thank you for that. Staying in schools, but moving to higher ed a little bit, there's a question from Nico Sanders asking if you'll present legislation to reduce student loans aside from President-elect Biden's push for $10,000.
Right. So we're working with others of my colleagues, Senator Elizabeth Warren and others, to put forward a more robust student loan reduction and forgiveness plan. They're both dealing with existing loans and reducing the burden of that debt. There's also the need to make sure that students who are entering college now don't come out with a huge debt. I was pleased that as part of the bill that we passed in December, while the focus was emergency relief, both in terms of health and the economic piece, when it came to higher education, we did increase the minimum amount for Pell Grants, which are a very important source of funds for so many students to afford college. We also revised what's called the FAFSA form. This is the form that the federal government uses to determine qualifications for federal student loan support, including a provision I worked on with our dear friend, the late Elijah Cummings, to make it easier for students who have been sort of separated from their household parents and therefore don't have that support structure, for them to qualify for Pell Grants and student loans. So a lot of work still to do to make college more affordable, whether it's 2-year community college, 4 years and beyond. And I can assure you that will be a continuing priority.
That's great to hear. Going back to the topic, I guess, where we started with Nathaniel Hicks, he's appreciating your leadership, but asking, why does it seem that the word treason is actively being avoided as it relates to the recent insurrection?
Well, I'm not sure it's being avoided. I think, a lot of us have applied that term, and certainly insurrection and sedition. I mean, what this really was an attack on our democracy from within, which does meet the definitions of sedition. People can treason, whatever you want to call it. This was a deliberate effort to sabotage our democracy, little d, with the big lie. I mean, this all started with the big lie. And, the thing is, the president forecast what he was going to do. I mean, all you have to do is rewind the tape. And before the election, in fact, before the first vote was cast, he said, if he loses, it's going to be a result of fraud, right? I mean, the idea that he couldn't possibly lose because a majority of the American people, wanted to vote for somebody else, or the majority of the states wanted to vote for somebody else. That couldn't happen except for by fraud. And then, of course, he put his game plan into motion once he did lose, by huge levels of the popular vote and a sizable margin electoral college. And so his effort to undermine our democracy, I mean, that is at the root of what he's doing, is sedition. It is treason against the Constitution. And so this is underpinning the trial, first the impeachment, now the trial.
No, thank you so much. So we have about 4 more questions in 5 minutes. So we're gonna do it like popcorn to get them out. But
Right.
The first is, it shifts a little bit to renewable energy. It's, what's the plan for implementing renewable and clean energy in Baltimore City? That comes from Jordan Taylor.
Right. Well, at the federal level, and this should certainly help accelerate efforts in Baltimore City, it is a huge priority of the incoming administration to tackle the issue of climate change, which has impacts everywhere from Baltimore to Maryland's Chesapeake Bay to the globe. And this is a big part of Biden's infrastructure modernization plan. When he talks about infrastructure modernization, it's not simply traditional infrastructure like bridges and roads. It's our clean energy infrastructure. And he is going to propose a massive federal investment in that area. It's an area I've done a lot of work on. I proposed what we call the Green Bank to create more low-cost capital to boost renewable energy and energy efficiency, as well as a proposal I put forward called the Cap and Dividend Bill, which essentially puts a fee on pollution, on carbon polluters. Polluters should pay. It puts that money into a fund and actually rebates all of those funds to all of you as a carbon pollution reduction dividend. And we're going to be urging the new administration to include that. But this is a top priority. In terms of Baltimore City, we want to work with you to make the city of sort of a clean energy hub. And there's already efforts to help assemble some of the big parts of these offshore windmills in Baltimore City. And we look forward to any other ideas people have as to how these federal efforts can promote jobs. And let me end with that. As the president-elect points out, this is about jobs because these are homegrown jobs. When we generate power here at home through renewable energy, that means we're not importing, oil from the Middle East, and it's putting people to work right here. It's also important for our global competitiveness because China has made this a priority. So sorry, I didn't stick to your quick answer, but that was a big question.
No, but very important and thoughtful response. So thank you. And I think it shifts into one of the other ones that was asked from Jordan Taylor about, how we're addressing economic development to ensure the security of communities so that external events like COVID don't have such a damaging impact on those that live so close to the poverty line. And when you talk about things like that, I would imagine you expand in how you create and some of what you talked about job creation with all of those things. But if you could just add a couple points to that to make sure that COVID doesn't have such lasting and damaging effects on those that live so close to the poverty line.
Right. So we need to do a couple things. I mean, in terms of the economy, one is to try to, develop more locally focused supply chains, and that provides more job opportunities, closer to home in Baltimore City and surrounding area. And this is true whether we're talking about our food supply chains or other supply chains that we all depend on. Reduce our dependence on key supplies coming from overseas, for example. When it comes to jobs, the key is to, again, provide the resources to small businesses, to minority-owned businesses, so we can have that economic development close to home. We've been encouraging major Baltimore employers, of course, to purchase locally, to hire locally. That, as you know, has been an ongoing initiative in Baltimore, but we really need to accelerate those efforts. The Biden administration has a big focus on Buy America. And, the federal government needs to do more to make sure that when it enters into contracts, it is purchasing from American-based companies. And again, this is an area where Baltimore is well positioned to take advantage of this initiative. And so, we look forward to working with all of you to make that happen.
Thank you. And Senator, if you will bear with me for one more minute, I'm going to combine the last two into one somewhat, because I think the thoughts are the same. If you look at either the Black middle class and or those who have not been sort of included in from a digital inclusion perspective. So the first question was really about legislation that can be proposed to help Baltimore increase its middle class. As we know, we're losing a lot of our base to the suburbs. And then the other part of that is it kind of layers on with your support of broadband and digital inclusion efforts throughout the state. And they list some of the bills that you have there, but really looking at how you support affordable broadband access and, ultimately the Black middle class. And we'll end with that one.
All right. Well, the Biden administration, one of its focuses is the renewal of American cities. And Baltimore is a great American city. Obviously, it's suffered from the same challenges so many cities have faced with sort of deindustrialization, loss of jobs. And we do need, I think, a Marshall Plan for our great urban centers. And this really involves the federal government working directly with leaders in the city, both elected officials, but also community leaders, small businesses, to figure out how we can best do that. I mentioned the bill that passed in December does have substantial resources that will flow through community-based lenders to try to get to small businesses and build Black middle class and expand opportunity. One of the big problems with our economy has been that it works great for folks at the very top, but not for everybody else. I mean, it's been a top-down, trickle-down model when we need a bottom-up model that builds the middle class. And that's the biggest issue, because we got to deal with the wealth gap, right? I mean, the wealth gap, the racial wealth gap is huge, and it's the product of all sorts of inequities in our system. We need to address the housing issue. And on the banking committee, we look forward to working with the incoming HUD secretary, Marcia Fudge, on that. I've spoken with her. But really, I welcome the ideas of everyone on this call, because there are some big issues that are structural to our economy. And we've watched Wall Street do great during the pandemic, even while, millions of Americans suffer, while small businesses suffer. So we've got to restructure our economy. The long-term unemployment bill that I mentioned is a part of structural reform. I want to make that clear. This is not like a one-time grant program. It's designed to provide subsidies to smaller businesses and large businesses for the purpose of hiring long-term unemployed, providing more upward mobility for more Americans. So again, I welcome ideas people have. Shannon is on the call. We look forward to your input and continued partnership with Baltimore City. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for joining us, for giving your thoughtful insights, for being here, Councilman. Before I close it out, did you want to say anything else?
Thanks, Shalonda. I want to make sure I'm on brand first before I say this.
Woo, go downtown partnership. Can you turn to the side so they can see it a little? Thank you. So, yeah. Senator, we'll make sure that we get you yours as well.
I'm looking forward to it. I will wear it proudly.
I want to just encourage everyone to continue to wear their masks as we roll out the vaccination. And Senator, just want to sincerely thank you for being an incredible friend to Baltimore City, always having our back, and for your great leadership in Washington. This is your second time on Downtown Download, so we're hoping there will be a third one. Hopefully later this summer. We'd love to have you back. And thank you for everything. Godspeed. Thanks, Shalonda.
I look forward to it. Thank you. Thanks for all your good work.
I want to send a special shout out to everybody who stayed on and who joined us today. I thank you for your participation and for holding us accountable. To my board chair, Mark Wasserman, thank you for tuning in. I see other board members have, so thank you for your leadership. My team, have to shout out Mike, Nicole, and Lauren for helping keep this as seamless as possible. And see you all next week when we have Mayor Brandon Scott on. So next Tuesday, the 26th. Remember, this will be recorded and on our site, godowntownbaltimore.com. So please continue to follow us, wear your mask, and stay safe. Thank you, Senator. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good to be with you. Thanks.